Over 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C., demanding justice and equality on August 28, 1963. They weren't there for a concert or a sporting event. They were fed up with segregation, discrimination, and being treated as second-class citizens. It was a sea of humanity, stretching from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. The crowd was diverse: black people, white people, people of various faiths and backgrounds, students, laborers, clergy, activists, and ordinary citizens who believed in fairness. They came by bus, train, car, and some even walked significant distances, organizing refreshments, sanitation, and first aid for 250,000 people in the summer heat was an immense undertaking. The atmosphere was electric yet calm, with a sense of anticipation. People sang freedom songs and held signs with powerful messages: "End segregated rules in public schools," "We demand voting rights now," "Jobs for all." These were deeply personal demands for basic human dignity and opportunity. The gathering wasn't just a protest, it was a powerful statement. It demonstrated the scale and determination of the civil rights movement. The government, the media, everyone had to take notice. You couldn't ignore 250,000 people standing peacefully but resolutely in the heart of the nation's capital. It was a visual and moral force that was impossible to dismiss. The march showed the nation and the world that the demand for equality was widespread and deeply felt. It was a turning point in the fight for civil rights. What were these 250,000 people asking for? The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom had a clear set of goals. At the top was a demand for comprehensive civil rights legislation from Congress. They wanted laws that would outlaw discriminatory practices in public accommodations, employment, and housing. The call for jobs and freedom was central. The organizers understood that civil rights and economic opportunity were linked. They demanded a federal program to train and place unemployed workers and a national minimum wage that provided a living income. They sought an end to segregation in public schools and protection for civil rights demonstrators against police brutality. The organizers, a coalition of civil rights, labor, and religious organizations, worked tirelessly. They navigated complex political landscapes and managed the immense challenge of mobilizing so many people. Their message was clear, their demands specific, and their execution flawless. When you think of the March on Washington, one name springs to mind: Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. By 1963, he was already a prominent leader in the civil rights movement. He was the final official speaker of the day, a strategic placement designed to leave a lasting impression. The anticipation was palpable as he approached the podium at the Lincoln Memorial. The setting was symbolic, with Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, in the background. Dr. King was about to speak to a nation deeply divided, grappling with its conscience. He carried the weight of generations of struggle and the hopes of millions. Before Dr. King spoke, other influential figures addressed the crowd, including John Lewis and A. Philip Randolph. Mahalia Jackson, the Queen of Gospel, also sang, stirring the souls of those present. This build-up created an atmosphere charged with emotion and expectation. Dr. King began his speech with prepared remarks, his tone measured and deliberate. He spoke of the promissory note that America had given to its citizens of color, a promise that had come back marked insufficient funds. He outlined the injustices and the fierce urgency of now, rejecting the idea of gradualism. He was laying a foundation, a logical argument for why change was essential and immediate. This was the prelude to something even more profound. Then, something remarkable happened. About halfway through his prepared speech, Dr. King paused. It's said that Mahalia Jackson called out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." Dr. King pushed his written text aside. What followed was largely improvised, a torrent of eloquence that would become one of the most famous speeches in history. He shifted from a reasoned argument to a prophetic vision. He began to paint a picture of his dream, deeply rooted in the American dream. "I have a dream," he repeated, creating a powerful rhythmic cadence. He dreamt of a day when his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He dreamt of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners sitting down together at the table of brotherhood. The power of the speech lay in its beautiful language, hopeful vision, and grounding in shared American values and religious faith. The impact was immediate and profound, resonating far beyond the Lincoln Memorial. It wasn't just a speech, it was a national sermon, a call to conscience that echoed around the world. While Dr. King's dream captured the headlines, the full title of the event was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The jobs part was a fundamental pillar of the movement's demands. The organizers, particularly A. Philip Randolph, understood that political freedom without economic stability was a hollow victory. African Americans in 1963 faced staggering economic disparities. They were often the last hired and the first fired, excluded from better-paying jobs. The marchers demanded an end to discriminatory hiring practices and proactive measures like a federal program to create jobs and an increase in the national minimum wage. The connection between economic justice and civil rights was clear. Segregation and discrimination were economic tools that kept an entire segment of the population impoverished. The fight for freedom was linked to the fight for fair employment, fair wages, and economic opportunity. The march highlighted that the struggle for black liberation was also a struggle for economic fairness. One of the most remarkable aspects of the March on Washington was its peaceful nature. 250,000 people, many of whom had experienced violence and injustice, gathered together. The potential for frustration to boil over was there, but the day unfolded with extraordinary discipline and calm. This commitment to nonviolence was a core tenet of Dr. King's philosophy, and a strategic choice for the civil rights movement. The marchers understood that any outbreak of violence would be used by opponents to discredit the movement. The organizers, especially Bayard Rustin, worked meticulously to ensure the event remained orderly. They coordinated with city police, organized their own marshals, and planned every detail. The peacefulness of the march contrasted with the violence that civil rights activists often faced in the South. By demonstrating restraint and dignity, the movement gained immense moral authority. The March on Washington was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. It marked a significant escalation and a shift in national consciousness. The event dominated news coverage both domestically and internationally. President Kennedy had initially been hesitant about the march, fearing unrest. However, the peaceful and powerful nature of the demonstration put immense pressure on his administration to take more decisive action on civil rights. The marchers laid their demands squarely on the federal government's doorstep. The march helped to build crucial momentum for the civil rights legislation that President Kennedy had proposed earlier that year. The demonstration showcased broad public support for its passage. It energized civil rights supporters across the country and put wavering politicians on notice. The moral force of the march made it increasingly difficult for lawmakers to justify inaction. The March on Washington created a political and moral climate that made the passage of landmark civil rights laws more likely. The most direct legislative consequence was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Kennedy had introduced a version of this bill before the march, but it faced a tough fight in Congress. After Kennedy's assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson took up the cause. The momentum generated by the March on Washington provided crucial public and political support. The act outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Following the Civil Rights Act, the next major legislative victory was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The march helped pave the way for this critical piece of legislation. The March on Washington served as a powerful catalyst, demonstrating the widespread demand for these changes. The legacy of the March on Washington extends far beyond the immediate legislative victories of the 1960s. It became a touchstone for future movements for social justice, both in the United States and around the world. The image of 250,000 people standing united for jobs and freedom became an enduring symbol of the potential of collective action. The march fundamentally altered the conversation about race and equality in America. It brought the harsh realities of segregation and discrimination into the living rooms of millions. The emphasis on jobs and freedom continues to resonate. The understanding that civil rights are linked with economic justice informs contemporary movements. The march reminded America that freedom includes the freedom from want and the freedom to participate fully in the nation's economic life. The March on Washington was a profound declaration of intent and a beacon of hope. The echoes of that August day in 1963 continue to inspire and challenge us to build a more just and equal society.